Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics, and welcome to my bench mess today. So I've decided to kind of bypass the niceties of a proper introduction and just jump right into the subject matter. And what we have here is the innards of a JBL Creature 2 speaker. I mean, it's it's a PC speaker, which basically has a subwoofer, which looks like this. It may look familiar to you. And what we also have, that's the top of the subwoofer enclosure. Here's the bottom, with a pretty hefty speaker for a computer monitor. It's a ported enclosure, ported through here. And I picked this up at a thrift shop, and it's not working right. So I tore it apart to see if there was anything we could do about it. The problem right now is these are the satellite speakers, or the satellite speaker enclosures, and this and this are the actual satellite speakers themselves. Now what the problem with this is that I powered it up, and there are LED indicators, just power indicators. There's one on the main unit, which is over here, which came on. Then there are power indicators on the bottom of the satellite speakers, little green LEDs there. And the left side one came on, or comes on, and the right side one just stays off. So I finally powered it up, hooked up a sound source to it, and what it does is there is distorted, very low-level distorted sound coming out of the left side speaker, and no sound coming out from the right side speaker, and also the power indicator on top doesn't light. So let's go in here and see what the problem is. I could not find schematics for this. This is the amplifier section that, of course, that has an integrated stereo power amplifier here mounted on the assembly that holds the port and acts as a heatsink for it. And there is mostly analog circuitry on here for amplification. There is some digital circuitry because it's got these touch pads for increasing and decreasing the volume. And it just uses capacitive switching, that when you put your finger on here it raises and lowers the volume. When you touch both of them at the same time it mutes the sound. But the first order of business was, well, if I can't find a schematic, it's going to be kind of difficult to kind of figure out the signal path in here, because there's quite a bit of stuff. I checked power. Power is correct. It's giving me about 27 volts at the main filter cap with very little ripple. So the power seems to be okay, but I'm going to have to sit down and really ohm this thing out to figure out what goes where. Is anything going into the power amp over here? Is it appearing at the satellite speakers? So I have no idea what the fault is, but I did a little bit of research on this, and I found reports of a common problem with these. And I think we're suffering from that common problem. First off, though, I looked at the PCB where the power amp is and checked all of the solder joints. I didn't see anything that was obviously cold or cracked or whatever, but I did go over it and reheated some of the joints, especially around the amplifier area. Checked to make sure that the connections were good. And what that got me was I got the light to come on both of the satellite speakers. The other one too. So I don't know if something was wrong with the soldering. I also sprayed the connections here with some contact cleaner and inserted the plugs several times. And it seems now that power is getting everywhere, but the symptoms are exactly the same. This speaker, which is the left speaker, is completely dead. Would help if I pointed at it, this guy. And this speaker does produce some very distorted low-level sound. Now, I hooked up a temporary woofer to this, and it seems to be doing something. It is moving some air, but it's kind of hard to tell with the frequency cutoff what exactly it's playing. It does have tone controls, treble and bass, and I can hear stuff coming through it, but it's very difficult to tell by just listening to a subwoofer if what's coming out of it is right or not. So let's assume that the problem is in the speakers themselves. Remember, I found some reference to speakers having a problem, and it seems that both of the satellite speakers themselves have the problem that is described. So let's have a look at the speaker here. It's a speaker like any other speaker with a plastic frame. But the problem is that the magnet back here is supposed to be flush with the back of the frame. Notice how this has moved downwards this way towards the cone. When I opened this, the magnet part was essentially flush with this part and physically preventing the cone from moving at all. Now what happens in a lot of cases is if there's still some cone movement with this metal part being close to it, the cone basically self-destructs. But it looks like the cone in this one is still good. So there's no tears, it does move. So the problem may be as simple as this, the magnet part needs to be moved back up to its original position. See that gap in there? There's not supposed to be a gap. This is supposed to be stuck to this part. The other speaker exhibits similar problems, if not identical. Look at this one. The magnet is all the way down, preventing the cone. The cone can't travel, can't move. Also, the speaker still looks good. There's no tears in here. So there's a good chance that this may still work if we move the magnets back to where they belong originally, so they're sitting flush with this. And I think the way I'm going to do this is get some quickset epoxy, put it into this gap, and then carefully move this up. It's pretty tight. I can't move it with my fingers. I'm probably going to have to use something as leverage on both sides. And then let the epoxy hold this in its original position, and then give it a sound source and see if that in fact is the problem. I'm going to be using this stuff called Quick Weld epoxy. Sets in 6 minutes. Is steel reinforced. And I've used this before. It's really strong stuff. So this should hold things in place. What we got to do is mix equal parts of these two tubes. Mix it. Shove it into the gap, the back of the magnet, and then carefully lever this magnet back up, not probably, but using 2 screwdrivers, one at each end to bring it up, and then let it set. And then do the same thing to the other speaker. Okay, here we go. I got the stuff mixed. So let's put some into the gap. Yeah, I'm going to make a mess, but who cares? Nobody's going to see that. I don't know what kind of glue they used originally, but obviously it wasn't meant to last for years. So here's the epoxy. And now we need to shove the magnet back. I think the best way to do that is to go in from both sides. And push down on it. Yuck. Anyway, it's pushed all the way down now. Let's make sure we don't get the epoxy on the cone. But clean up a little bit, while we still can, of course. And see if this is strong enough to hold the magnet in place. So there you go. And of course I got my fingerprints all over it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other speaker too, and then we can give it a test maybe. So here's what the speakers look like with the magnet fully retracted and epoxied. So the epoxy sets in 6 minutes, but it needs another 4 hours to cure. So I probably shouldn't try this before it cures, so it doesn't start pulling the magnet down again. And I'll probably spend the meanwhile cleaning up the plastic parts a bit. In general, I'm kind of impressed by the quality that this is made. There's a lot of attention to detail. For instance, look at the bottom of the speaker satellite. It's actually got a rubber gasket going all the way around. And there seems to be a lot of attention to detail in here. One of the things that I guess a lot of manufacturers have to deal with, I don't think the best environment for a PCB is inside a subwoofer enclosure. Obviously, for the vibration that is caused, and that may have caused some of the joints to crack in here, but I guess that's the way you build it. What else do you do? Make yet another external box for this, but the whole idea of having a PCB inside a that is exposed to strong mechanical vibration by itself seems kind of an odd approach to me, but I guess that's the way they build them. And the last thing is, don't you hate it when you're putting something together and you have parts left over? Well, all the parts I have sitting all over here, lots of screws and buttons and washers and all of that, everything's accounted for. But I found this rubber O-ring, and only one of them was laying on the bench. I could not figure out where this came from. I tried it on the speakers, front, back, everywhere. It doesn't fit. And there's only one of them. So I tried to become a little bit more logical, and finally I found it. It is actually used in here on the port duct. Also has a gasket here, but it fits very nicely. Right on here. And it doesn't have a lot to do with the sound, but I'm sure this goes a long way towards preventing rattles between the port here, which fits here. So yeah, there's quite a lot of attention to detail. They also used quick connects on all of the speaker terminals. Not some big solder blob on here. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised by the quality that went into this. So let's give this a few hours. And its buddy to let everything cure, and then we'll put the satellites together and pump some sound through it and see if we fixed it. The epoxy has cured. It's been several hours. But before putting the whole thing back together again, I thought I'd just put together the satellite speakers and see if our fix took hold. So let's see. Volume works on it. Subwoofer works, even though that's not the one in the actual speaker. Since my stereo reproduction is non-existent, you'll have to take my word for it that they're both working and they sound crystal clear. I see some movements in the subwoofer, but of course there's a quiet section here. I know something bass heavy. Yep. Subwoofer is definitely moving. Making some nasty noises here, but that's because it isn't mounted correctly. But I think the speakers work, so the volume works, the mute works. Good, so things seem to work. So I guess I should put the puzzle back together, do some final cleanup on it, and give it a final test. Well, this is what it looks like. I did manage to put it all back together again, with no pieces left over. Well, actually I have a couple of screws in here, but that's what holds the major dome together. And seems to work just fine. Makes a big difference with the subwoofer properly mounted. And one last sound test. So the tone controls also work. Everything seems to be good. Needs a bit of a polish, surface kind of rough, but other than that, we got a unique looking and probably unique sounding speaker. It's not very powerful, but I think as a computer speaker set, it'll work just fine. Thanks for watching. Thumbs up would be appreciated. Make sure to subscribe and leave me a comment. See you later.